I found the letter by accident, folded inside a stack of junk mail I almost threw away without opening. A scheduling confirmation from a neuropsychological assessment clinic, addressed to me for an appointment I never made, requested by a woman who is not my doctor, not my lawyer, and not, as it turns out, entitled to schedule anything in my name at all. If you've ever had someone quietly try to prove you're not capable of running your own life, hit subscribe right now, because what I did after I read that letter is the only part of this story I'm actually proud of. My name is Elias Grumman. I'm 63 years old. I've restored furniture for a living since I was 22. Chairs with broken spines, dressers nobody trusted to hold weight anymore, a 110-year-old roll-top desk that a family outside Columbus still sends me a card about every December. I apprenticed under a cabinet maker named Otto Reyes, who ran a one-room shop behind a hardware store and didn't say more than 40 words to me my entire first year there. Otto taught me the only rule that ever really mattered in this trade. You don't force a piece of wood to be something it isn't. You read the grain, you find where it already wants to bend, and you work with that direction, not against it. Every piece of furniture that's ever come apart in my hands came apart because somebody, at some point, tried to force it instead of reading it first. I didn't understand until very recently that this applies to people too, and that some people read exactly like a piece of wood with a hidden crack running straight through the center, smooth on the surface, and rotten wherever you actually put weight on it. My hands know wood the way other men know their own handwriting. You learn things doing this kind of work for 4 decades that you don't learn anywhere else. You learn that the strongest joint in any piece of furniture is almost never the one you can see from the outside. A proper dovetail holds a drawer together for 200 years, and to somebody who's never built one, it just looks like 2 pieces of wood that happen to fit. That's the whole secret of good joinery, and it's hiding in plain sight the entire time. The strength is never where a stranger expects to find it. I've thought about that one sentence more in the last 8 months than in the previous 40 years combined. I raised one son, Nathan, mostly on my own, after his mother, Josephine, died when he was 19. Cancer. Fast. 11 months from the first diagnosis to the funeral, which even now feels like it happened over a single long weekend rather than most of a year. Josephine ran the front of our little restoration business for 2 decades, took the calls, kept the books, talked customers down when a job ran 3 weeks longer than I'd promised. Losing her took the business's memory, along with everything else. I remember standing in our kitchen the week after we buried her, telling Nathan he didn't have to quit his last year of community college to come take care of his old man, that I'd been building things with my hands since before he was born and I'd figure the rest out myself. He finished his degree that spring. Josephine would have liked that more than almost anything I've done since. Nathan got a job in logistics, moved 40 minutes away, and 7 years ago he married a woman named Camille. I want to be fair to her here, because I'm not a man who decides he dislikes someone on principle, and for the first 2 years of that marriage I genuinely liked her. She was sharp. She asked good questions at Sunday dinner, the kind that told you she'd actually been listening the whole meal instead of waiting for her turn to talk. She noticed things other people walked past. The same way I do, honestly, when I walk into a room and my eye goes straight to the one chair leg somebody repaired badly. The problem, and it took me longer than it should have to see, is that after a while I started to notice exactly what, specifically, Camille had trained her eye to notice about me. It started small enough, 2 years ago now, that I genuinely didn't think anything of it. Camille asked, more than once, in that easy conversational way people ask questions they've actually been sitting with for weeks, whether the business had done well over the decades, whether I'd ever looked into long-term care planning, whether I had a will drawn up, and if I did, whether Nathan had ever actually seen what was in it. I answered honestly, because at the time I had no reason not to. I told her the business had done fine, not spectacular, steady, and that most of what Josephine and I ever built together was tied up in the house and the workshop, paid off free and clear back in 2011. Telling her that felt, at the time, like the safest, most transparent thing a man could say to his son's wife. I understood much later that I just handed her a map with one blank space on it, and the blank space was exactly what she'd spend the next 2 years trying to fill in. The first real crack showed up 18 months ago at a 4th of July barbecue in front of my own sister. Camille mentioned, casually, that she'd noticed. I'd repeated a story twice in one afternoon and wondered out loud whether it might be, quote, worth getting checked out, just to be safe, at my age. I laughed it off at the time. Everyone repeats a story. I'd told the same one about Otto Reyes and a roll-top desk, probably 400 times in my life. Ask anyone. But I noticed she said it in front of my sister specifically, not to me privately. And I noticed she used the phrase at my age, like it was already a settled fact, rather than an offhand comment. 6 weeks later, at a different family dinner, she brought it up again, this time mentioning that she'd read an article about early warning signs and that forgetting small details runs in families sometimes. I still didn't say anything to Nathan. What I did instead was start paying much closer attention. The way you do the moment you notice a hairline crack running through a piece of wood, and you don't yet know if it's purely cosmetic or something structural underneath. Over the following 10 months, I watched her build what I can only describe, in hindsight, as a file. She asked to help organize my paperwork twice, and both times I found things slightly out of place afterward. Not stolen, just rearranged. The way you'd rearrange something you wanted to photograph or copy before putting it back. She started asking Nathan, not me, pointed questions about whether I'd ever gotten lost driving somewhere familiar, whether I seemed more forgetful lately, questions specifically designed to be answered by someone else about me, in my absence, so I'd never hear them ask directly and never get the chance to answer for myself. And 4 months ago, she mentioned to my sister, again, never to me, that she was worried enough that she'd looked into what a formal capacity evaluation involved, just so the family would have documentation, in case anything ever needed to be decided quickly. What I did not know yet, and wouldn't know for another 4 months, was that the day I found that letter in my mailbox would also be the day I quietly decided who was and was not ever going to be allowed anywhere near my legal affairs again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. A scheduling confirmation, printed on clinic letterhead, addressed to me for a neuropsychological capacity assessment, the exact kind of formal evaluation that gets used down the line to support a petition for guardianship or conservatorship over somebody's financial affairs. The appointment had been requested by phone 3 weeks earlier by a caller identifying herself as my, quote, primary family contact. I called the clinic myself the next morning. The receptionist confirmed after some hesitation that the request had come from a Camille Grumman, listing herself as my daughter-in-law and stating she had concerns about my financial judgment that she wanted documented by a professional, quietly, before bringing it to the rest of the family. I sat with that for 3 full days before I did anything at all. Then I made 2 decisions, both on the same afternoon, both without telling Nathan yet, because I didn't want to be the father who blindsided his son with an accusation he couldn't fully back up. The first decision was to cancel the appointment myself and request, in writing, that the clinic never accept a third-party scheduling request in my name again without my direct authorization. The second decision was harder to admit, even now. I understood that if Camille was already building a paper trail toward a guardianship petition, then any cache of mine she could point to as unaccounted for or poorly managed would become evidence in exactly the case she was trying to build. $18,400, saved slowly over about 11 years from small informal restoration jobs, sitting in an ordinary savings account was no longer just money to me. It was a liability, in the wrong hands, at the wrong hearing. I was already, coincidentally, 3 months into building a cedar hope chest for my granddaughter Josie's 10th birthday. The kind of piece meant to hold a person's whole childhood eventually. Recital ribbons, a christening gown, letters somebody writes her someday. I know how to build a false floor that never reads as one. It isn't a trick drawer with an obvious seam around the edge, the kind of thing a curious 10-year-old finds by accident within a week. It's a second-floor set precisely 4 centimeters below the visible one, held by the exact same joinery as every other seam in the piece, invisible unless you already know the one corner to press with steady, deliberate weight. I moved the entire $18,400 out of the savings account, in cash, over the following 6 weeks, in amounts small enough not to trigger a single reporting flag at the bank, wrapped it in wax paper, and sealed it inside a cedar-lined cavity no wider than a shoebox. I sanded the seam down until it disappeared into the natural grain, finished the whole chest the way I finish every piece. 3 coats of oil, hand-rubbed, no detail skipped because nobody would ever see this one anyway. I gave Josie the chest for her 10th birthday, in front of the entire family this past spring. Camille actually teared up watching her open it, thanked me afterward for always thinking of the kids first, which I remember hearing at the time and thinking it was one of the more unsettling sentences anyone had said to me all year. 4 months ago I fell off a stepladder in my own workshop, reaching for a router bit, stored one shelf too high, cracked 2 ribs, and knocked myself out cold long enough that a neighbor found me and called an ambulance before I'd even fully come to. I spent 5 nights in the hospital, 2 of them fairly disoriented from the concussion and the pain medication, which matters because it's exactly the window Camille had apparently been waiting for. Nathan later showed me the paperwork. On the 2nd day of my hospital stay, while I was still groggy enough that a nurse's note in my chart described me as intermittently confused, Camille contacted a family law attorney about filing an emergency petition for temporary financial guardianship, citing my documented cognitive concerns and a pattern of disorganized finances. The petition never got filed. Nathan, reviewing the draft paperwork she'd left open on their shared computer, refused to co-sign as a required family witness, and without his signature, the filing stalled before it ever reached a judge. I got discharged on a Friday afternoon. Nathan drove me home himself, quiet the whole ride, clearly carrying something he hadn't said out loud yet. When we pulled into the driveway, the garage door was standing wide open, which I never once leave it, and I could see straight through into the workshop before the car had even fully stopped. Every drawer in my workbench had been pulled out and left hanging on their slides. The pegboard where I keep 40 years of chisels had been taken almost entirely off the wall, 4 screws sitting loose on the concrete, like somebody had needed to check behind it for a hollow space in the drywall. The floorboards along the east wall, the ones I'd replaced myself 6 years ago after a slow water leak, had been pried up at 3 separate points and never put back flush, so the whole section sat uneven, like a row of teeth knocked slightly out of alignment. My own grandfather's tool chest, the one thing in that garage I've never once let anyone else open, was sitting on the concrete with the lid thrown back, everything inside dumped and pawed through. Whoever did this hadn't been careless. They'd been careful in exactly the wrong direction. The specific kind of careful you get when you genuinely need to find something to hand a lawyer, and you're running out of places left to check. Nathan finally said it, standing in the doorway behind me. She was here Wednesday. She told me she was looking for the account statements, so she could help sort out your finances before you came home. I understood, right then, exactly what she'd actually been looking for. Not statements. Cash. Something physical and unaccounted for that a lawyer could point to in front of a judge as proof I could no longer be trusted to manage my own money. Proof that would matter a great deal more than a stalled petition if she could resubmit it with better evidence attached. Camille came by 3 days later, on the Sunday, with a casserole and an expression rehearsed just carefully enough that I recognized it immediately. I've looked at plenty of furniture over the years, trying hard to hide a repair under fresh varnish, and it always has that same slightly too smooth look if you know what you're looking for. She said she'd been so worried while I was in the hospital that she'd only gone into the garage to find paperwork that might help the doctors, that she'd gotten carried away and hadn't meant to leave such a mess. I let her finish the whole story before I said a single word back. Then I set the clinic's letter down on the kitchen table between us. Camille, why don't you tell me which account you actually thought you were going to find? And what exactly you were planning to do with it once you did? She didn't have a real answer ready for that. Something vague came out about only wanting to protect the family. And I watched her understand in real time that I already knew about the assessment, the attorney, the draft petition Nathan had refused to sign, that there was nothing left in the story for her to control. So I told her the truth, calmly, the way I'd explain a repair to a customer who genuinely wanted to understand exactly what I'd done and why. I told her I'd known for 4 months that she was building a case to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs, and that I'd known it long enough to do something deliberate about it. I told her I don't keep anything valuable where a person expects to find it, because that's never where the real strength lives in a well-built piece of furniture. And then I told her, still calm, still even, that the $18,400 she'd torn my garage apart looking for had been sitting 22 miles away this entire time, inside her own daughter's bedroom, inside a chest I built with these 2 hands, given to her in front of the whole family, 4 months before she ever tried to schedule that appointment. You spent 4 months building a case that I couldn't be trusted with my own money, Camille. And all you actually proved, standing in my garage with a crowbar, is exactly why I made sure you never would be trusted with it. She went pale. Not angry at first. Just pale. The color draining out of her face the way it does when a person understands all at once that the story they've been telling themselves for months was wrong from the foundation up. Nathan didn't defend her. That told me more than anything either of us said in that kitchen. He sat down across from me later that same evening, ran both hands through his hair the way he's done since he was maybe 12, whenever something didn't add up the way he needed it to, and asked why I hadn't told him sooner. Not the barbecue comment, not the letter, none of it. I told him the truth. That a man doesn't want to believe his son married someone quietly building a legal case against him, and that I'd rather move $18,000 into a cedar chest in complete silence than accuse his wife of something I couldn't fully prove yet. I didn't take the chest back, and I want to be clear about that, because it would have been the easy thing to do, and also the wrong one. Josie never did anything wrong in any of this. The money is still there today, still hers eventually, exactly where I put it. What I did do the following week was sit down with my own attorney and formally name Nathan, and only Nathan, as my medical and financial power of attorney, with language specifically excluding any in-law from ever petitioning on my behalf again. I updated my will the same afternoon. Camille was never named in either document, and everyone in the family now knows exactly why. Nathan still comes by most Sundays, sometimes with Josie, sometimes alone. My sister, once she heard the whole account, the letter, the attorney, the stalled petition, stopped speaking to Camille entirely, which surprised nobody more than Camille herself. She'd clearly assumed the barbecue comments had landed as concern, not as the opening moves of a campaign. Camille hasn't been back to the workshop since that Sunday with the casserole, and I've made a kind of peace with that particular silence. Some repairs aren't meant to hold, and I've stopped pretending this one should. I fixed the floorboards myself the week after I found them pried up, replaced 2 outright, re-sanded, and refinished the rest until the seam disappeared back into the wood, the same way I've repaired other people's damage 1,000 times across 4 decades. You genuinely can't tell now, standing in that garage, that anything was ever torn apart there at all. That's the whole craft, in the end, if I'm honest about it. It was never really about things not breaking. Everything breaks eventually, given enough time and exactly the wrong kind of pressure in exactly the wrong spot. The craft is knowing how to put something back together so carefully that the repair ends up stronger and a good deal quieter than the original piece ever was. I think about that dovetail joint constantly these days, the one that holds firm for 200 years and never once shows its own strength to anybody standing on the outside looking in. 4 decades in this trade taught me that about wood a long time ago. It took a letter from a clinic I never called to teach me the same thing about people. The ones actually worth trusting are never the ones announcing it loudest at the dinner table, and the ones who aren't will spend 4 months building a case against you and still come up empty, because anything worth protecting was never meant to be found by somebody who was only ever looking for a reason to take it. If this one got you thinking about the quiet, patient ways people protect what actually matters, subscribe and stay a while. Aching Truth posts a new story most weeks, sometimes more, and I promise you this will not be the last time somebody badly underestimated exactly who they were dealing with.